Alongside the growing pressure from the United States on Iran and the cautious but systematic support from China, Russia is beginning to play an increasingly visible role in this confrontation, viewing what is happening not as an isolated regional crisis, but as part of a broader struggle over the redistribution of influence in the world. According to sources, Moscow is closely monitoring developments and is becoming more actively involved in the Iranian track, acting in the most pragmatic manner and avoiding steps that could lead to a direct military confrontation with the US. Russia's strategy, analysts note, is built on the principle of asymmetric support, not demonstrative and not loud, but sufficient to complicate any plans for rapid pressure on Tehran. Unlike China, which focuses primarily on the economy and energy, Russia is betting on security, coordination, and the transfer of experience in surviving under sanctions pressure. According to insiders, it is precisely this experience that is of particular value to Iran today. Moscow, having gone through years of restrictions, blockades, and attempts at isolation, has effectively become for Tehran an example of how a state can adapt to a new reality and maintain governability. In expert circles, it is emphasized that Russian assistance to Iran is not limited to arms supplies or military advice. Much more important are the exchange of intelligence information, consultations on protecting critical infrastructure, cybersecurity, and countering external pressure. According to sources, cooperation between Moscow and Tehran in these areas has noticeably intensified in recent months. This includes joint threat assessments, analysis of possible scenarios for actions by the US and its allies, and the development of measures to reduce vulnerabilities. Formally, all this is presented as bilateral cooperation within the framework of regional stability, but the strategic subtext is obvious. Russia is interested in ensuring that Iran does not become another example of regime change under external pressure, since such a precedent would strengthen Western positions and create additional risks for Moscow itself. That is why, analysts believe, Russia is ready to help Iran stay afloat even if this requires significant political and economic efforts. The diplomatic factor also plays an important role. According to sources, Moscow is actively using its channels in international organizations and multilateral forums to soften or block the toughest initiatives against Iran. This does not always lead to immediate results, but it allows processes to be delayed and time to be gained. In conditions where the time factor is becoming increasingly critical for the US, such tactics take on special value. Experts note that Russia acts in close, though not always public, coordination with China, sharing a common interest in preventing a rapid and unilateral resolution of the Iranian issue in Washington's favor. At the same time, each side plays its own role. China provides the economic rear, Russia the strategic and political cover. This division of labor, analysts believe, makes support for Iran more sustainable and harder to neutralize. For the US, this means that pressure on Tehran is increasingly running up not only against Iran's own capabilities, but also against the interests of two major powers ready to defend their positions. Inside Iran, Russian support is perceived as a factor of stability. According to sources, Iranian elites view Moscow as a partner that does not demand sharp concessions and does not impose ideological conditions, unlike Western countries. This creates an additional level of trust and allows Tehran to feel less isolated. At the same time, analysts emphasize that Russia is acting extremely cautiously, avoiding steps that could be interpreted as direct military intervention. Moscow understands that an open confrontation with the US in the Middle East does not serve its long-term interests. Therefore, the focus is on gradually complicating the situation for Washington rather than issuing a sharp challenge. This is the key feature of Russia's role. It is not aimed at immediate results, but at changing the overall configuration of forces. The longer Iran remains resilient, the more resources the US is forced to spend on containing it, and the less room it has to exert pressure in other regions. Experts increasingly note that Iran is becoming another point where Russia and China jointly test the limits of American influence. This is not an alliance in the classical sense, but a convergence of strategic interests that makes the situation especially complex for outside observers. As a result, Russian support for Iran becomes part of a broader picture in which the world is moving faster toward a multipolar system, and regional crises turn into elements of global competition. The longer this confrontation continues, the clearer it becomes that the issue is no longer just about Iran's fate, but whether a single state can still impose its decisions, or whether the future will be determined by a balance of power in which every pressure inevitably meets a response. At this stage, analysts believe it is clear that Russian support for Iran goes beyond tactical steps and is gradually taking on the character of a long-term strategy. In Moscow, sources say they proceed from the understanding that Iran's resilience is not only a question of regional balance, but also a measure of how effectively one can resist unilateral pressure in a world where rules are increasingly applied selectively. That is why Russia, observers say, pays particular attention to creating a time cushion for Tehran, allowing it to maneuver between sanctions, threats, and negotiations. This involves expanding alternative financial channels, using settlements in national currencies, and coordinating logistics that reduce Iran's dependence on vulnerable routes. At the same time, Moscow, experts believe, shares with Tehran its experience of adapting an economy to a prolonged sanctions regime, from restructuring foreign trade to protecting key sectors from external shocks. This exchange of knowledge and practices does not make headlines, but it has the potential to transform the resilience of the Iranian system in the long term. In the diplomatic dimension, Russia continues to act as a brake on abrupt decisions, using multilateral formats and bilateral channels to steer the crisis into a manageable course. According to sources, Moscow seeks to maintain dialogue even with countries taking a hard line on Iran, offering de-escalation scenarios that allow all sides to save face. Analysts emphasize that this approach does not mean concessions, but reduces the likelihood of a sudden collapse of the situation. At the same time, Russian experts stress that the strategy relies on a combination of deterrence and flexibility, demonstrating readiness to protect a partner without becoming involved in direct confrontation. As a result, a complex configuration emerges in which Iran receives support, the US faces rising costs, and Russia strengthens its role as one of the key intermediaries and actors in the region. In a broader context, this reinforces the trend toward multipolarity, where regional crises are no longer resolved quickly or unilaterally. The longer this dynamic persists, the clearer it becomes that the outcome of the confrontation over Iran will be determined not by the power of a single strike, but by the ability of the parties to withstand pressure and manage time. According to observers, this is the main effect of Russian assistance. It does not eliminate the conflict, but changes its rhythm and logic, making rapid decisions less likely and forcing all participants to reckon with a new, more complex reality.